All right, something is happening this week in China, and this is the meeting of the Chinese ruling party. It's the Communist Party's China's Communist Party is holding its Congress. Very many things are happening. Of course, the President Xi Jinping addressed the gathering yesterday where he talked about very many things. Among them, we are going to continue democratizing our country. We are going to continue with our modernization, and we are going to continue with our development agenda. And he says development is key and central in the next couple of years. You see, the way we've been talking about China and the way they work with 15-year development plans. Us guys don't know what's going to happen after 2030 because our vision 2030 is coming to an end in 2030.
Yes.
China is currently implementing the 2020 to 2035 plan. And beyond that, they're discussing the 2035 to 2050 plan already. Us guys, 2031.
2031.
Vision
We will
2030.
discuss
Don't confuse
Let's
us.
stick with 2022 for the time being, shall we?
Let's do that.
On Monday.
Okay.
Yeah.
President Xi Jinping as well is the focus, the global focus from conversations emanating from the CCP Congress. Why? Because they're saying that this is where Xi Jinping cements his leadership of this country. The party agreed to remove term limits for the president of China. So now Xi Jinping does not have to exit office this year after coming into office in 2012. He stays in office anyway. All these things. We are joined by a journalist who understands these matters pretty well. She works for the China
Global Television Network.
Should say it.
Huh?
Say it.
CGTN.
Say it. Say it.
Say it.
Say. She works for
China Global Television Network.
Yes.
Is that not what I said?
That's what I wanted
you
you to
said.
say.
Okay, when we say it again.
You're whispering it.
It isn't so much what you said, it's what he was hearing.
Oh, right. Okay. So here we go.
Perhaps you should tell us, what were you hearing, Eric?
I did not want her to whisper.
Oh, she wanted me to say it with some force.
yes.
Got it. Done.
Okay.
All right.
Okay.
Because I started saying it, then you jumped in, you just say it.
Oh, you were hesitating, so I was wondering what the slogan was for.
Yes. And the name of the journalist is Ma. Good morning, Ma.
Good morning, Eric. Thank you so much for having me.
Welcome to Kenya's biggest conversation. Welcome to the hot seat. Well, you are one of us, so we'll just hit up this seat up to 10,000
no problem.
degrees. This Congress, give us the background of the meeting that's taking place it's called the Great Hall of the People.
Yes, it's the Great Hall of the People that sits in the center of the Tiananmen Square, which also sits in the center of Beijing. So it means this is one of the most important political events of the year. The background of the National Congress is that it's held every 5 years. Every 5 years, about 2,000 representatives of about 2,000 communist representatives from all levels of party branches, all provinces or autonomous regions from China. They gather in Beijing, in that Great Hall of the People, to discuss important issues that will affect not just the party, but also the country for the next 5 years. It's, like I said, it's held every 5 years. But when the meeting is not in session, because as you know, it's a Congress, and it's not easy to, mobilize 2,000 people every year to Beijing, and so that when the Congress is not in session, we have the plenary meeting of the governing body of the CPC, which is the CPC Central Committee, and that plenary meeting happens every year. And when the preliminary meeting is not in session, we have an even smaller group called the Politburo of the CPC, about 25 people, and they will help, decide on important issues.
Is that like the cabinet?
Well, I think the cabinet is more like, if I'm not wrong, a body of the government. It's the governing body of a country, but like Politburo is the governing body of a party.
Of the party.
Yes, it's the decision-making body of a party.
Okay. Why is this particular meeting different from any other that has taken place of the party?
Because I think, a lot of things can happen in 5 years, and as I believe the world has witnessed in the past 5 years, like these changes are even more immense. For example, the COVID pandemic and the all kinds of changes, and also China celebrated the centenary anniversary of the CPC last year. And this year at the work report, President Xi Jinping, who's also the General Secretary of the CPC, he announced that China has successfully accomplished its first centenary goal, which is to, one of the, there are many, but I think personally one of the goals that's closer to my heart is the elimination of poverty. China has successfully lifted about 800 million people out of absolute poverty, and that's about 70% of the world's goal under the UN target. So I believe that's quite impressive. And another change we have witnessed in the past 5 years is that that's what currently the journalists in China are calling it the new era of China, which means, you know, we have also witnessed like the China-US trade war, and, you know, the many different rhetorics against China's, you know, rising. So I think, we're facing new challenges. In China, Chinese people have become more confident and more certain about the path we're working on. So I think that's what's new to me personally as a journalist.
2,000 people gathering for a congress of the party. Now, very many people across the globe say, but you see, there's no democracy in China. So you say there's 2,000 people who are coming to meet. I mean, who are they? Who picked the 2,000? How are they selected, the 2,000? How is the party organized? Is there any form of democracy in China?
Sure, I can. Actually, I'm very glad you asked that question because I think it's in September that the name list of these 2,296 representatives was announced by the official website of the CPC online. As regard to the question you asked about how they were selected, first of all, they're selected according to different provincials. They are the provincial representatives of different provinces, different regions. They're selected geographically. And also to make sure there's an equal representative among different ethnic groups. We have representatives from different areas of China that is more dwelled by ethnic minorities, like the Tibetan, like the Tibet and Xinjiang. We have representatives from there. And also, as you might know, China has different autonomous regions, like especially the special autonomous regions like Hong Kong, Macau. We have representatives from there. So these are the geographical and administrative selection of these representatives, and also to make sure people from the ground level, for example, the poorest villages, yes, if I may call them that, the most underprivileged communities of China are well represented. We also have what we call a ground level party member. They may not even ever stepped out of the village before they come to this Congress, but they are equally selected to make sure they present their people. The voice of their people is equally heard. I think that speaks louder than anything else to say that there is equal representation of Chinese people everywhere, and there is, well...
But they are selected. You have not heard you saying they're elected. I haven't heard you saying that this village person is actually picked by the fellow villagers. Who picks this village person?
Village person?
Yeah. This person from the lowest level in the village.
The leader at the community level.
At that community.
Yes.
Who picks them?
Well, they are elected. Well, we have the elected people representative who go to the who also go to Beijing to have what we call 2 sessions, which is I believe is called the decision making, the policy makers. And these policy makers, they will gather in Beijing every March to decide on, you know, policies of the country in the next 1 year. Actually, this year in March, we have just had these 2 sessions where they have decided on economic goals. They have decided on future policies regarding COVID. So, yeah, I believe, but this is, like I said, this is the Congress of the party. So mainly they decide party issues. But because CPC is the ruling party of China, so their policy, their guidance is important to the future direction of the whole nation.
You know, the history of China, at least that I've read, is a fairly interesting history. And the achievements that you speak of are beyond compare. It's difficult to point to any nation on this planet that has achieved some of the things that China has. But I've often wondered how, for instance, you're a journalist, so you're a good person to ask this question. Would the Chinese leadership explain their democracy? Because it is believed they have a democracy. So how would they explain it? If I was a lay person trying to compare the Chinese democracy and other democracies in the world, how would you explain the Chinese democracy?
Well, for starters, I'd like to say that every country has its own different background, its history, its route of development. And secondly, I'd like to say that, well, I understand what you're trying to ask me.
Yes.
I don't think China has to follow anyone's definition of democracy. Our people have made our decisions, and it is the ruling party's duty, which they have done so well, to deliver those promises they've made when the new China, when the People's Republic of China was founded. And they've done a great job so far. And I believe they will keep doing a good job in the future. And that is the belief of not just me, it's the belief of 1.4 billion Chinese people. And as you say, how to explain to the world the democracy of China?
Yes.
I think sometimes facts speak louder than...
Perhaps I should ask, how do Chinese people explain their democracy to themselves? And then how do they explain to the world? The world isn't obligated to understand, but there is an explanation that is given. So that's really what I'm asking.
How does China define its democracy?
Yes.
I think, well, I can only speak as a journalist, that from the point of view, also as a Chinese, from my point of view, I think China's democracy is working for itself. And I understand that it is not the most typical example of democracy under the definition of the West, which is, you have to have multiple parties, you have to have parties competing. But I believe that, as I said, it has worked for China. And Chinese people are not complaining. And if we are getting questioned or we're getting accusations from somewhere, as you might have read about, personally, I don't think we are, well, as in the legal system, it's the accuser who proves the evidence, not the accused.
I think it's very interesting, the things that you say, Ma, because also then that a lot of times some of the narratives then that we have read, as you have said, come with a Western skew.
Yes.
Right? And that hearing that the people of the country, all 1.4 billion of them, are not complaining about the status quo. If we're looking at 800 million people being pulled out of poverty in,
A generation.
in a generation,
Yes.
it's, anybody would be myopic at best to call that anything less than phenomenal, right? You can see the progression of the same. Is it necessary, in your opinion, then looking at this, because we cannot run away from the fact that narratives fuel global discussions.
Sure.
It doesn't matter how you look at it. Is it necessary to take into recognition then what these Western narratives are? Because many things fly in the face of this developmental progression of China.
Absolutely.
Human rights,
Yes.
abuses, whether
Yes.
they do or do not exist.
Yeah.
The big brother status that China plays over Hong Kong, Taiwan, the issues that China has more than a firm grip on developing countries, especially looking at its what many will call neo-colonialism in Africa. All of those things jump out at us. Does it matter that those narratives are doing the rounds globally? Or what matters is that China is doing what it set out to do and the people of its country are satisfied?
Well, I appreciate you listing out all these. Personally, to me, it's very unfair accusations against China, against Chinese government. And I agree that, well, if I have to say, I would say that it is the satisfaction of the Chinese people that matter.
Yeah.
Because at its foundation, at its dawn, I would call it in 1949, when the People's Republic of China was founded, it has always been paramount that the interest of the people is safeguarded. The safety, the security, may it be food security at the early ages when China was poor and hungry, or now when China is, facing challenges, sometimes military challenges from other countries. I think, it is the satisfaction of the Chinese people that would always topple the need to be recognized. But I wouldn't say that, okay, China would just go its way regardless what people say. So that's what people like me do.
Yeah.
We have a channel here, China Global Television Network. That's what we do here. I personally handles the coverage of people's story here in Africa. We have broadcasted about 200 episodes of famous African people like Haile Selassie and Kenyatta. So our purpose here is to increase the understanding of people back home about African countries, at least to understand that Africa is not a country. It has
Start from there.
Start from there, yes, exactly. And also, on the other hand, to increase the understanding of China by our African friends. Because it's a very sad thing to see that sometimes the narratives here are still very dominated by a Western mentality. I'm not saying it's wrong. I'm just saying maybe we need a different voice.
Or we need a balance.
We need balance, maybe. Yeah.
And that's where it comes from, because you're coming into a situation where the socialization of the society that you're now operating in has been impacted and heavily influenced by the West. The media that we've consumed over so many years is the West. The kind of understanding of what a government should look like, what democracy should espouse and look
what
like.
It can look like.
It comes from the West. Western style of democracy is where, so like you said, multi-parties competing, people participating in an election, universal suffrage and that such kind of things. And then there are checks and balances in leadership. So there's going to be a ruling party, there's going to be opposition parties, or there will be some checks and balances. Now, when you're explaining China's system of government to the African continent, then you've got to show what are the similarities and what are the differences. So, for example, when it comes now to checks and balances, with this one party, it's the only party that is ruling, it's a giant party. Are there checks and balances within the party and structures of government, and how are those played out? Is there oversight over the leadership of the party? How is that played out?
Definitely. Like I said, this National Congress that's happening right now is the party's Congress. But if we want to take a look at the wider, picture of the, like you said, the political system of China, we need to look at the two sessions, which happens every year during March. We've just talked about the people's representatives. They go to Beijing and they discuss, they make decisions, and they vote on certain amendments, etc., on the constitution, if there is any. And there is another, why it's called two sessions. Another session is exactly what you mentioned, the political consultants. What we call them is political consultants. They are that political consultants. They are made up of people from not opposing parties, but smaller parties. We do have.
So there are smaller parties in China.
Yeah, sure. They're just smaller, but their opinions are equally important. We even have representatives from Kuomintang, that will attend the 2 sessions. Just imagine that. Because Kuomintang, we had a civil war with them.
That was the former Nationalist Party.
Yes, we had a civil war with them, which led to the now separation of Taiwan from China. But we still accept them as our political consultants. So I think that, that is evidence enough that we listen to everyone. Apart from that, we have representatives from different interest groups, different NGOs. We have a consultation prior to those national congresses to gather opinion from different groups to make sure everyone's interest is well looked after.
You know, the thing that is probably not often mentioned is that even democracy as we speak of it is actually an experiment. And if you look at the Western democracy that we keep speaking of, in the not too distant past, the purveyors of that democracy have had an opportunity to question it and to ask whether it is the best form. So when you say, yes, China looks at what works for them, yes, it is correct. Democracy doesn't necessarily have to follow a certain path for it to be considered a universal democracy. Arguably, there are tenets that are universal, but one doesn't have to be in full agreement for it to be a democracy. Now, having asked that question, you have the chairman of the party. You then have the president. Then you have the person who's also chairman, or is it president of the military? Not very different from what you have in the West, because here we have president and
head of state
and
commander in
chief, more or less the same sort of like thing. Okay. Now, how does one get elected as the Secretary General of the party? Because it isn't as though you appoint yourself.
No, you can't.
There are people who decide who should be. Who are these people?
Just like what's happening right now in Beijing, we have 2,200 something representatives who will elect after the conclusion of this 20th National Congress. They will hold the first plenary meeting of the 20th National Congress, and they will elect what we call a governing body of the CPC, which is the CCC, which is the Central Committee of CPC. This is a new Central Committee, and that committee has about 200 people. And they will further elect the Politburo, who will oversee, like I said, when the plenary meeting is not in session, they will oversee the party affairs. And those 25 people or something, they will elect further the standing committee of the Politburo, which is what you might call the party leadership. So, of course, you can't appoint yourself, but that is how, layer by layer, you are entrusted by your fellow party members to make important decisions. And I think that is very transparent, and it has been going on like that for years, for decades.
So essentially, it's the party that is the moving force behind the goings-on in the country of China. Remember, it's the party that meets, it's the party that decides, it's the party that elects. Then you have a president. Yeah. So it is the president.
Oh, it's not the party who elects the president.
Who elects the president?
The people at the People's Congress.
How? And these people are the members of the members of the party.
Yeah.
Yes. The members of the party elect the general secretary.
Elects the general secretary of the party.
Yes.
Yes.
Who becomes the president of the country.
And the president of the country must have been a member of the party. Yes. What I'm trying to say here, I actually like that system. I like the system for this very reason, that I look at how I start from looking at a population of 1.4 billion. And then there's a question of how do we get to mobilize this community of 1.4 billion people so that their interests are taken care of. And so you have a system. Like with all systems, I'm sure it's improved on every so often. But this one is centered around the political party.
Yeah.
Yes.
It's organized around the party.
Around the political party. So
and then
it
there are
is
checks and balances
Yes.
such that even the general secretary, who's the president,
Yes.
is answerable to organs
yes
of
within
the party.
within the party. So the check and balance actually exists, which
They do
means
exist.
if the president starts doing his own crazy things, there is a system by which they can tell you, sir, just come a little bit. Why don't you have lesser duties? Go and do something else, because
Yes, I'm actually. Thank you for mentioning that. I probably didn't get your question. The checks and balancing
Yes.
of the president's power,
Yes.
of the general secretary's power.
Yes.
We have, after like I said, the Central Committee of the CPC elect the Politburo, they would also elect a disciplinary committee to oversee all the decisions made by the governing bodies, the Politburo. So
Those are the ones.
those
Yes.
are the ones.
Those are the ones.
Those
Yes.
ones. You're summoned to the that
Disciplinary committee.
The disciplinary committee. Kwisha. Bas. Just know you're Amanda.
And-
Let's take a break.
And if I may add that under very close watch of all the party members, not just the high level, but especially the ground level, because sometimes they are farther away from the supervisional system. So we have we have a disciplinary commission at every level to make sure that, like you said, they don't do crazy things.
They don't run off the
They
rails.
don't know.
In fact, after this break, you tell us what President Xi Jinping has done in terms of ensuring that there is justice and there's no abuse of power, especially by the party officials at the grassroots level. The whole issue of making sure that, there's going to be rule of law and order and there's going to be party. It doesn't mean that because you're the chairman of the party at the grassroots level, you then become the magistrate.
No, you can't.
And decide.
And the chief of police.
And the chief of police
No, you
and
can't.
decide who goes home. 24 minutes to 10. We're having a conversation about China and the ongoing National Congress of the ruling China. What's it called? The CCP info?
Well, we call it CPC, but you can
CPC.
call it CCP.
Okay, what is CPC?
CCP.
It's the Communist Party of China.
That's it.
Yes.
We'll call it that. CPC.
Thank you.
The Communist Party of China is having its National Congress this week, and we're discussing what that means. How does that impact Africa, particularly? Our guest today is a journalist with CGTN, the China Global Television Network, Ma Kay. She's here with us in the studio.
This is the Situation Room, the only way to start your day.
So, Xi Jinping became president in 2012. His predecessor, Hu Jintao, had been president for 10 years. His predecessor had been president for 10 years. If we look at the time since the death of Chairman Mao, the leaders of China have basically just been holding office not for long. And then in those 3 presidencies, we've seen a proper cycle of 10 years. However, Xi Jinping is set to continue being president even after serving 10 years. What's happening?
Well, I think there's the issue of the continuancy of policies. Because as we talked about right now, there is many challenges that are facing China as well as the world that we've never seen before. For example, the pandemic, the Taiwan question, which are at the core of Chinese people's concern. So I think in order for these policies, these solutions that are going on very well to continue, or might I add the Belt and Road Initiative, these are not short-term problems or initiative. These are things that we need to address in the long term. So I think in order for the policies to continue, in order for leadership to have its profound impact on the future of a nation, I think I don't think there's any problem with a continuancy of his tenure as the General Secretary as well as the President of China.
What was the wisdom in having term limits?
Sorry?
What was the wisdom in having term limits in the first place? What made the leadership of the party decide that our General Secretary, our President, is going to serve for maximum of 2 5-year terms?
Well, I have to speak frankly, I didn't study that area very closely, but personally as a journalist and as a Chinese person, I think, the beginning point of having a term limit is to make sure that there are new policies, there are new thoughts that would come in and, bring China on to try out different options. But I'm afraid options are not a luxury we are having right now, because important decisions must be made. And like he mentioned during his work report yesterday on Sunday, he has mentioned several important issues like the continuance of a green development route for China and the continuing of opening up of China, and of course the solution of the Taiwan question. And I think those are not the things you can take as experiments. Well, at first, I believe during the leadership of China's first few leaders, we have had our fair chances of trying out things, and then we had our corrections, and most of the time, their options have proven to be correct. And I believe, having that term limit is to make sure that possibly we have different opinions, we have different input to make sure the policy is varied. But like I said, right now, it's not a luxury we can afford.
In 1980, China had a president called Deng Xiaoping. Now, up until that point, remember, this term limit you speak of had not really existed. Going back to the time of Chairman Mao. Now, there are many things that happened in Chinese society that I think many people in the leadership looked and said, these things require changing. So term limits are not just set in terms of you can only be in power for 10 years, but even age limits were set.
Yes.
So that when you are even a party member or you are a leader, you get to a certain age, you exit, someone else comes in. I think the understanding was the lure of power. Now, when there are no limits, then people assume for themselves, if I may use the term, an almost godlike quality, where you think whatever you say will go because no one is challenging it. And I think these changes are what probably made it possible for many of the things we're talking about to happen. New leadership comes in with new ideas and the understanding that you have a period within which you must achieve certain things, and after that, other people will take over. So there has been continuity. Now, truthfully, the world is facing challenges it has never faced before. So are we therefore saying that the continuity that China has seen or has witnessed, it is felt, because it isn't as though the president decided to continuously make himself president. There's a process by which that particular constitutional requirement was removed. But it opens it up to no limits again. So the discussion that comes about is, what is it that will be done to ensure that the problems that brought about the limits in the first place do not recur? Because it was not a systems problem, but a human problem. A human without limits will do limitless things, good or bad.
Well, I think you have raised a concern of many Western media as well. I believe that I've also read so many articles asking that question. And personally, I believe the mistake, as you refer to, will not occur again. I'm not really aware which mistake you were referring to.
During Mao's rule, one of the things when you have a leader who's ruled for too long is you acquire a cult figure. So loyalty is not to the state or the nation, but it's to the leader. Now, that always causes problems. It doesn't matter which system of government you have, it will cause a problem.
And then there are people around the leader who become very powerful beyond the leader.
Irrespective of even the official positions that other people may have.
Yeah.
Yes. So it's the leader.
People around the leader abuse their power.
Yes.
And maybe that's why there was even a crackdown after Mao's death on those who were close to him. There was a crackdown on some of those political leaders at that point, because they had reached a point where they were just operating with impunity, as was said then.
Well, personally, I don't think they were operating with immunity. As you said, the narrative of the West is always like our beloved Chairman Mao had become sort of a cult figure, which I really don't agree. He was the level of love people had for him is very high. And he was a very wise and very successful leader who led China out of, during even the Civil War, he agreed to put down the grudge he had with the Nationalist Party. And they fought together against the Imperial Japanese Army and successfully brought China out of the semi-colonized and semi-feudalist society into a modern China. And after he became the president and general secretary of the CPC, he also brought China out of the very absolute poverty from then. At least he has directed China on the right path. And I do agree, people's judgment would be lower when they get older. But I don't believe that's the necessary case. And I don't think, because he's the first president of the People's Republic of China, and everything was an experiment, and everything was new back then. And, because he has been so successful, I don't think people at the time thought there would be any problem to continue believing in this leader. But I don't think by having a continuous leadership of President Xi Jinping would be a similar situation as 70 years ago, because we have now more accomplished, more sophisticated political system. Like I said, we did have a lot of experiments back then, but now we have established socialism with a Chinese character in it, which means we're not following anyone's footprints, not the Soviet Union, not anyone. This is socialism with Chinese characteristics, and it has worked. So, and as we talked about, we have inside the party the disciplinary committee to oversee the decisions, to oversee all the procedures of decision making. So I don't believe the so-called mistake would reoccur. And I'm pretty sure that Chinese people across the world are confident as me that we are very capable of deciding what kind of leader we want, and that is the decision we have made right now. And yes, we believe we have made the correct decision.
You know, the issue is not, if I may say so respectfully, about whether Mao's rule was what it was. History bears witness that in the absence of Mao's intervention, China would not be what it is today. It is the human element that comes into play when you are in a position of prolonged power. That really is what I was saying. It is not a Chinese Communist Party issue. It is not an American Republican Party issue. It is a human issue. Someone stays in power, a group of people stay in power for a length of time. Power has this tendency of acquiring a life of its own. But that having been said, when the Congress meets, what are the things that you think the Congress will be talking about and thinking about the future of China for the next X number of years? Because if we look at the success, one might want to look closely and see what they're going to do and how they're going to go about it, because that might be, in fact, a blueprint that other people may want to emulate.
Well, I think during the Congress yesterday, General Secretary Xi Jinping has already made a work report on what is going to be the focus of the party for the next 5 years. And those include long-term targets, like the targets of from 2020 to 2035, and the secondary target from 2035 to 2050. And those include further make sure to safeguard the results of the poverty alleviation and to make sure China enters a moderately prosperous society in all aspects, and also to make sure that China stays on the path of green development, continues to open up, and also to increase its network of partnership around the world in face of the challenge of the COVID. So I think these are the long-term targets that we have reiterated that we will stand fast on. And there are also short-term targets, like to make sure under the effect of pandemic, our economy can bounce back as much as possible. Because at the beginning of the year, the GDP target was set at 5.5% for this year, but experts are having their concerns that it may not be that high. But that question is actually answered today, this morning in Beijing, during a press conference of the CPC members. And they have said that, in order to make sure that economy doesn't slip too much, there will be measures taken to gradually open up physical economy and also to make sure that foreign trade is resumed as much as possible, because as you may know, China are the biggest trade partners for many African countries as well. So I think that will not just benefit China itself, but it also will, benefit those especially small businesses that rely on the business of China to develop and prosper, because a lot of smaller businesses have, gone bankrupt during the past few years. Is very tragic.
How would all of this impact on Africa moving forward? We know what the relationship has been over the last decade between China and other African countries. And we've seen that presence, north, south, east, west, if we're focusing directly on the continent. Now, looking at this forecast, the projection of what the party then will do with, the president being there for, however long it will be. What impact does this have on the relations with Africa?
Well, I like to point out that during the past 10 years, during his 2 terms, General Secretary Xi Jinping and President Xi Jinping, he has paid several visits to African countries. Like actually the first few visits, foreign visits, he took as Chinese president in 2013 is to, I believe, Tanzania, South Africa, and Republic of Congo. And when he was during his second term, he visited Senegal, South Africa, and some other African countries. So, and under that guideline of enlarging the network of strategic partners around the world, especially here in Africa, I believe the trade volume has gone up immensely. But I believe that is already very well known. What I like to point out is the technical exchanges we're having right now, especially what I witness every day in Kenya. Like when I go to a mall, I see shops of Redmi, of Huawei. This is not something, frankly, I expected before I came. And it really surprised me, the level of technical exchanges. And my friends, they're saying that they prefer using Huawei and Xiaomi because, of course, Redmi is like more affordable, and Huawei takes better pictures. And regardless of this technical exchanges, we're also having a great increase in the infrastructure section, like the expressway, like the Mombasa-Nairobi railway. But I believe in the future, these cooperation will go further to the direction of green development, because China is not here to, relocate its labor-oriented industries. We're actually giving our high-end technology companies to relocate here. We are opening up branches. So I believe those development is going to a direction that's not just about money, but also about exchange of our best.
Well, Ma, thank you very much for you've given a lot of insight into what's happening with the Congress, what's happening in China in terms of the leadership of the party. We'd like to have you again more and more, as we keep talking about China-Africa relations, China-Kenya relations. You understand them very well. Asante for joining us today.
Thank you so much, Eric, for having me.